So how's the war going in Iraq and Syria? I know that Trump said he was going to get really tough on ISIS. We'll share some of his thoughts about that in a second. That's easy enough to say. But how about civilians? Well, first, now let's be fair. Let's talk about what Obama did when he was fighting the same war against ISIS in those two countries. Air Wars is a group that documents civilian deaths. The coalition forces and the US forces have at certain times said they're part of the same team as us. They're helping to count civilian casualties. Obviously our guys undercount because so for example, some of the ways that we undercount is we won't talk to any witnesses on the ground. Because if we did, they'd say, yeah, you killed a lot of civilians. That was an aunt, that was a grandmother, that was a baby. So they're like, in a couple of the horrific instances, including hitting a school, we're like, oh, let's not talk to witnesses. But Air Wars does talk to witnesses. They have a more accurate count. So this does not bode well for Obama. Air Wars researchers estimate that at least 2,300 civilians likely died from coalition strikes overseen by the Obama White House. Roughly 80 each month in Iraq and Syria. So if you say, where were you guys when that was happening? Well, we were right here and we were criticizing him for that throughout. Now I know that there are no such things as pristine war and there'll be many mistakes. I understand that. We should take all the effort in the world to preclude that. And one of the things that we used to criticize Obama about is in the places, not necessarily here, but in the places where they did signature strikes from drones, that meant that they did not know who was on the receiving end of that bomb. They knew that, hey, we have some signatures there, like it might be a cell phone. Well, we think that cell phone was at some point connected to a bad guy. Let's go ahead and bomb it. And that led to a tremendous amount of mistakes. So that was under Obama. And signature strikes were mainly done in other places, but obviously lots of mistakes in fighting ISIS with 80 a month civilians, not terrorists, civilians killed. Now, Trump promised to do worse. Let's take a look at what Trump promised during the campaign.
I would knock the hell out of. I like to do one thing at a time. I would knock the hell out of ISIS. Okay. I would hit them, Brian, so hard like they've never been hit.
What about civilian casualties? What about the fact that we're targeting them and people are very concerned about collateral damage?
I would do my best, absolute best, but we're fighting a very politically correct war.
Yeah. Well, we see that happening.
The other thing is with the terrorists, you have to take out their families. When you get these terrorists, you have to take out their families. They care about their lives, don't kid yourself. But they say they don't care about their lives. You have to take out their families.
So he promised to murder civilians, and then he got elected. So did he murder more civilians? The answer is yes. Now he said terrorist families. Now when you're dropping a bomb, how do you know if it's a terrorist family or someone else's family? So for example, sometimes under the Trump watch, we'll drop a bomb because all rules are now suspended apparently. You'll get the details in a second. Because we think we saw an ISIS fighter on a rooftop 2 homes away, and we'll drop a bomb on the house that's not the one he was on, but the one that's 2 away, killing 11 people in that house. The family killed in that house, they weren't terrorists, they were civilians. But Donald Trump doesn't care. He's like, what difference does it make? All right, let's prove it out. So is that the case? Let's look at the numbers. Maybe he's killing less civilians than Obama. Let's find out. As of July 13th, more than 2,200 additional civilians appear to have been killed by coalition raids since Trump was inaugurated. Upwards of 360 per month, or 12 or more civilians killed for every single day of his administration. So let me just put those numbers in context. The entire time that Obama was president, 2,300 civilians were killed in this conflict. Trump in the first 6 months has already killed 2,200 civilians, almost caught him. And now let's look at the numbers that they just outlined there. Under Obama, civilian casualties were 80 per month. Under Trump, they're 360 per month, 4.5 times greater. Now, think about the earlier number. 12 or more civilians killed every single day of his administration. So you wake up today, and I know that a lot of Americans look and go, oh my God, what did he tweet today? And sometimes it's very serious, sometimes it's light, and we laugh at what an idiot our president is. But every day that you wake up, understand that Trump has authorized through his actions 12 more innocent civilians killed in Syria and Iraq. Every day, the next day another 12, the next day another 12. Those are the numbers that we've gotten. So how did we get here? Well, as the Daily Beast reports, to give you one more sense of context for how bad it can be at any particular time. In one well-publicized incident in Mosul, the US admits it was responsible for killing more than 100 civilians in a single strike during March. But hundreds more have died from coalition attacks in the chaos of fighting there. So that one we admit. We say, oh yeah, no, those numbers are accurate. We killed 100 at one time. Oops, what difference does it make? We promised that we'd kill their families. There they are. I mean, maybe they're related, who cares? Okay, if they care, they're certainly not showing any evidence that they do. So how do we get here? In one of his first moves as president, Trump ordered a new counter-ISIS plans to be drawn up. Second on his list of requests were recommended, quote, changes to any United States rules of engagement and other United States policy restrictions that exceed the requirements of international law regarding the use of force against ISIS. So what does that mean? Well, Daily Beast actually did a great job of summarizing. This is what they said. In short, Trump was demanding that the Pentagon take a fresh look at protections for civilians on the battlefield, except those specifically required by international law. That represented a major shift from decades of US military doctrine, which has generally made central the protection of civilians in war. So, in other words, we have now changed the rules and said, that's it, have at it, Hoss. So don't worry about the protection of civilians. Do the bare minimum to protect civilians. Let's go get them. And if a lot of civilians die along the way, they're not US civilians, who cares? They're grandma, grandpa's babies, whatever. Remember when Trump pretended to care about the beautiful babies in Syria? When Assad we think had killed him doing that chemical strike? And he's like, oh, the beautiful babies, the beautiful babies. How about all the ones we're killing? Who cares? Who cares? Let's go kill their families. Okay, Larry Lewis is Joint Civilian Casualty Study lead analyst. He says, if we're losing opportunities to hit ISIS because we're nervous about civilian casualties, if it is not required by law, then we're saying really look at it hard. Now, so he appears to be supporting Trump's policies, going, hey, listen, man. I mean, if I miss an opportunity to hit an ISIS guy a couple of houses away, because I was worried about 11 family members sitting there having dinner and with their kids, and I was concerned about their life, well, then I'm not gonna be able to hit ISIS hard enough. And by the way, that will be persuasive to some right-wingers. They'll say, I mean, what are you gonna do, man? I mean, you gotta murder some families to get ISIS, right? I think there is another way, and certainly Obama, who I thought was doing way too much of it, was not doing it anywhere near this degree, because he was telling the generals, hey, be careful, because when you go to kill civilians, not only is it morally repugnant and what we accuse ISIS of doing, but it also is counterproductive. So a former State Department official is going to explain why it's counterproductive. He said, we have spent a long time advancing the idea that preventing civilian casualties is not only a moral imperative, it's also an operational one. These lessons come directly from our military's counterinsurgency experiences in Afghanistan and are endorsed by members of our military at some of the highest levels. But so far, we haven't seen or heard anything that shows that President Trump understands that. And in fact, of course, we've seen the opposite. And General Mattis, who's now the defense secretary, gave a speech saying that they are going to do an annihilation of ISIS. Look, if you could just annihilate ISIS, great, that's what we want you to do. Nobody's against that. But apparently, his directions were taking a little broader. The month after Mattis delivered the new plan, US-led forces likely killed more civilians than in the first 12 months of coalition strikes combined. So the first month, more than the whole previous year, because they're like, civilians, so what difference does it make? Look, it is in their actions and their words. He says, we're gonna kill their families. Then they go kill their families. They more than quadruple the number of civilians killed. They killed more civilians in 1 month than coalition had done in a whole year. Well, and then here's a CENTCOM spokesperson, was on the phone with the Hill. They had to walk this one back because it seemed a little too politically incorrect. But he identified himself as a spokesperson for CENTCOM and told a reporter this. President Trump said prior that once he gets in, he's going to kick the SHIT out of the enemy. That was his promise, and that's exactly what we're doing. Well, but okay, show me body counts of ISIS fighters, okay? But what we've got here is body counts of civilians. So that's not kicking the SHIT out of anything other than innocent people. And then what do you think their family members are gonna do? Are they more likely to be on our side or their side? Human rights groups that are so concerned about what ISIS is doing to the local population, they've been interviewing the people who were able to escape places like Raqqa for years. And normally the things they go, oh, thank God I got rescued, I got out of there. The ISIS was killing our family, oppressing it, and all the horrors that they talked about. And then they were running out of food and water. Now, when those same human rights groups talk to the survivors of Raqqa and other cities in the area, and especially in Iraq, Raqqa's in Syria, Mosul's in Iraq. Those same survivors say, yeah, the starvation was bad, and oh my God, it was brutal under ISIS. But the worst thing was the American airstrikes, because as we were about to leave, a bunch of our family members got blown up. They're dead now. So it doesn't solve your problem. Sometimes it makes it worse. So how is this being enforced? And one last example. Lieutenant General Stephen J. Townsend says proudly, we shoot every boat we find. So if you think, well, that's every boat we find that's an enemy boat, well, they had it coming, that's great. That's how we talk about annihilation of ISIS. Well, let's find out what's actually happening. Air Wars has documented numerous civilians reported killed in recent weeks as they had attempted to flee Raqqa by way of the river. Shortly after Townsend's remarks, Raqqa's being silently slaughtered, that's another human rights group, reported that at least 27 people in Raqqa had recently been killed attempting to fetch water around the Euphrates. So if you don't use human judgment anymore, you don't use your mind and you don't use morality, and you say just bomb every boat, bomb everyone by the river, who cares? Well, what are you gonna do? You're gonna bomb people getting water? You're gonna bomb people fleeing? And yes, you're gonna kill a lot more civilians. Yes, you're gonna kill a lot more families, but they're not gonna be terrorist families. They're people who were just trying to barely survive in Raqqa or get the hell out of Raqqa because they hate ISIS and want to run away from it. And as they were bravely trying to do that, the last thing they saw was a US bomb dropping on their heads and killing everyone on board. So if this is your idea of getting tough with ISIS, okay. Well, I guess you're comfortable and you think every morning that you get up, yes, another 12 innocent civilians killed today, Trump's in charge. But if you think, yes, there is a deep moral problem with that, yes, we're supposed to be better than our enemies, and yes, this is not a smart strategy for how you defeat ISIS and gain the support of the local population, well then, this is very disconcerting news. TYT membership gets you commercial-free Young Turks. Download it, stream it, podcast it, get all the network shows, and support independent media. TYTnetwork.com/join.